Welcome, Senator.
Yeah, good to be here.
Now, carbon tax is still a big thing in the news. People are either against it or confused. Where do we stand at the moment? What's been happening?
Well, we always have to remind ourselves that this is a tax Julia Gillard said before the election she would not introduce. She said there will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. The reason we are opposed to it is because it's bad policy for Australia. It will push up the price of everything, it'll cost jobs, it'll make Australia less competitive internationally, and all of that without actually doing anything to help reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, our argument is if people in Australia are asked to make a sacrifice, it should actually be to achieve a difference, to make a difference. To ask people in Australia to make a sacrifice by paying more for their electricity and everything else, and to put their jobs at risk without actually achieving any reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions is a completely inappropriate way to go.
And to be fair to the government as well, they've said they're going to bring out a compensation package for pensioners, low-income earners. How's that going? Because tax cuts were on the equation, now that they're sort of being quietened away.
Well, I mean, essentially what they're saying that half of the money collected by the tax will go into compensation for households. Under the coalition, there'll be 100% compensation because we will not have the tax. If you don't impose the tax, if you don't push up the price of electricity, if you don't put people's jobs at risk, then obviously you won't have to redistribute the money that you've collected.
So, understanding this, we're going to introduce a tax. The government will collect revenue from this tax. Then they will pay most of that tax in compensation. So it's like a circle. Is that going to actually benefit anybody?
It is quite a ridiculous proposition. The government is telling us that about half would go to households. Then they're going to spend some money to help polluters through the transition. And then, of course, they're going to spend a bit of money, quite a bit of money, I believe, on paying bureaucrats that are going to have to go through the process of checking up on everyone to make sure they're doing the right thing.
How would you, just quickly, as the opposition, how would you handle climate change?
Well, we think that we should do everything we can to help reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. Let me just put that straight up front. And we have a strong, fully costed, practical plan, a direct action plan to reduce emissions in Australia in a way that will actually reduce emissions in the world. We want to do it through better soil carbon management. We want to do it by a better technology in cleaning up coal-fired power stations, investing in better technologies that help reduce emissions in Australia in a way that actually reduces emissions in the world.
So heavy polluters under the coalition, what will happen to them? Will you still impose a fine or a cost to them or not?
I mean, the people that are supposedly the heavy polluters, they are the businesses that employ thousands and thousands of Australians. And I would put it to you that businesses in Australia are much more environmentally friendly in their operation, much more environmentally efficient than equivalent businesses in many other parts of the world. And if we put a price on carbon and make those more environmentally friendly businesses less competitive than polluters overseas, then all we'll do is shift emissions, shift jobs, and shift the work out. And the world is no better off. But in the meantime, people in Australia are also worse off.
Now, a couple of weeks ago on Question and Answer on ABC, we saw the former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, have a couple of things to say. Let's have a quick look at that footage.
It's intriguing what you've just said. I mean, you've basically said, if I understand it correctly, that some people within Cabinet wanted to get rid of the ETS forever, not just to shelve it, delay it, but actually to get rid of it. We're opposed to it.
Well, as I said, there were strong views on both sides of the equation. People were concerned, to be fair to their view, that with the global financial crisis, the ability and the uncertain employment prospects, we're talking about 2000 and early 2010, where we still didn't know how far out of the woods we had come, that people were quite concerned about in putting a price on carbon, its effect on family incomes at a time when a whole lot of people are under financial stress. So to be fair to that argument, that's what they were putting forward. But as I said, there are some who wanted to junk it. There were others who wanted to sail straight ahead, notwithstanding the fact we didn't control the Senate. I tried to find a path up the middle of that. It didn't work.
And also coming out and saying that didn't work either, because he got backlash from the Labor Party. What do you make of that, what Kevin Rudd did then?
Well, I mean, this was a direct attack by Kevin Rudd on Julia Gillard's authority and credibility as Prime Minister. He was telling the world that people within the Cabinet didn't agree with an emissions trading scheme before the election.
And of course, we know people are still there.
Well, those same people are still there, and we know that Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan were two of the people that wanted to kill the carbon pollution reduction scheme before the last last election. So it's very hard, in the light of his comments, it's very hard to say what Julia Gillard actually stands for, because before the election, she wanted to kill the ETS, she said there would be no carbon tax, and then after the election, she's got a conversation with Bob Brown and the Greens, and all of a sudden there is a carbon tax. She never took that proposition to her own Labour caucus, and here last week, of course, we had Paul House, one of the leaders of one of the biggest unions, say that he would not support a carbon tax if one single job is lost as a result. So he has been talking to workers across Australia. Julia Gillard just talks to the Greens and Bob Brown when she should be talking to people across Australia.
I agree. Couple of minutes left. We're going to talk about the budget just quickly. What's coming up with that one?
Well, I mean, we've seen a lot of the spin and leakage of pre-budget information coming out. The government is telling us how their revenue is down and how it's going to be a tough budget. I guess our point is that we've had 3 years of budget mismanagement. This government inherited a very strong financial position. They've inherited a very strong budget. Over the last 3 budgets, we've seen $40 billion in new or increased taxes. We've seen more than $90 billion worth of new government net debt. And so if the government is now saying they haven't got enough money, it is because of the waste and mismanagement on pink bats and school halls that we've experienced over the last 3 years.
All right, and finally, the independents have been in the news. They've been copying a lot of flack from death threats, etc. What do you make of this? Because we were talking off air, and there is obviously no place in Australian life for death threats for people doing public office. What do you think?
Well, death threats are never appropriate in no circumstance, and they shouldn't be part of the political discourse in Australia. Like, we are a free democratic society. There should be robust debate, but obviously there are certain boundaries beyond which we shouldn't go.
Why do you think they're copying this flack? What's causing it?
Well, I mean, as I say, nothing justifies death threats. I mean, obviously, from our point of view, if you look at the broader political debates at the moment, we think that the independents are attached to the failures of the government by virtue of them supporting a Labor minority government that's not performing well. They are attached to the failures of that government.
Because you've had Mr. Windsor, you've also had the gentleman yesterday from the
Andrew Wilkie,
and you've also had Robert Oakesholt get death threats as well. So it seems to be a pattern there. Do you think it's going to get worse before the next election?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I hope that we can continue to have robust debates in Australia about policy issues that are well within the confines of what the democratic debate should be about.
And Parliament's coming back soon, in a few weeks?
Indeed. We'll have the budget in the second week of May, and there'll be no doubt a lot of debates that will come out of that.
And I'm sure you're keeping the pressure on the government as well.
Doing our best.